My name is Kara Ellison, and I'm 31 years old. 6 years ago, at a family barbecue in my parents' backyard, my mother turned to a table full of relatives and said, "Kara's still figuring things out. We can't all be Megan." She laughed. Everyone laughed. And I stood there, holding a bowl of potato salad, smiling like my face was stitched into place. But 3 weeks ago, at my sister Megan's engagement party, my husband stood up in front of 200 guests, a live band, and an ice sculpture shaped like a swan, and told every single person in that room exactly what I do for a living. The look on my mother's face, I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. Not because it felt like revenge, because for the first time, she couldn't rewrite the story. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? This one's going to take a while, and I promise you it's worth staying for. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Ridgewood, New Jersey, in a white colonial house with black shutters and a front yard that was mowed every Tuesday at exactly 6 a.m. by my father, Gerald Ellison. My mother, Diane, was a former pageant queen who never quite got over the fact that life after the crown wasn't as shiny as the stage. My older sister Megan was born first, and from the moment she arrived, she was the axis the whole family orbited around. Megan walked early. Megan talked early. Megan read before kindergarten. Every milestone was a headline in the Ellison household, printed in bold and underlined twice. I came along 2 years later, and from what I can piece together, my arrival was more of a footnote. Not unwanted exactly, but not celebrated the way Megan's had been. My baby album has exactly 11 photos in it. Megan's has 4 volumes. The differences started small. At the dinner table, my mother would ask Megan about her day first. Always first. If I tried to jump in, she'd hold up her index finger without even looking at me and say, "Kara, let your sister finish." Megan would talk for 15 minutes about a spelling test or a playground argument, and by the time she was done, my mother would nod at me and say, "What about you?" with the energy of someone reading a cereal box ingredient list. I remember the first time I understood that something was structurally wrong. I was 9 years old. It was picture day at school, and I came home beaming because my teacher, Mrs. Calloway, had told me I looked beautiful. I ran into the kitchen to show my mother the Polaroid they'd given us as a preview. She was on the phone. I tugged on her sleeve. She pulled away, mouthed, "Not now," and kept talking. 20 minutes later, she hung up, looked at the photo I'd placed on the counter, and said, "Your hair's a mess, Kara. We'll have to get retakes." That night, I cried into my pillow so quietly that even the walls didn't hear me. I know now that a 9-year-old shouldn't have to learn how to cry silently, but in the Ellison house, my emotions were an inconvenience. Megan's were events. By middle school, the pattern had calcified into something permanent. Megan joined the debate team. My parents bought her a $200 briefcase. Megan got the lead in the school play. My parents invited the entire neighborhood to come watch. When I made the honor roll for the first time in 7th grade, I brought the report card home and left it on the fridge. My mother moved it to make room for Megan's volleyball schedule. She never mentioned it. But let me tell you about the birthday that still sits in my chest like a stone I swallowed and never fully digested. I turned 14 on March 3rd. It was a Saturday. I woke up early and padded downstairs in my socks, expecting the smell of pancakes because my mother always made pancakes on birthdays. Always. It was the one tradition she kept without fail. But the kitchen was empty. No batter, no griddle, no candles on the counter. I stood there in the gray morning light, listening to the refrigerator hum, and I thought maybe I'd gotten the day wrong. I hadn't. My parents were in the garage loading Megan's volleyball gear into the minivan. She had a tournament in Princeton, 3 hours away. My mother saw me standing in the doorway in my pajamas and said, "Oh, Kara, happy birthday. We'll do something when we get back tonight, okay?" She didn't even stop moving. She just set it over her shoulder while stuffing a cooler into the trunk. They didn't get back until 10:30 that night. Megan had won MVP. There was so much celebrating about Megan's trophy that by the time someone remembered it was my birthday, the bakery was closed and my father handed me a $20 bill and said, "Get yourself something nice tomorrow." I spent my 14th birthday eating a microwaved Hot Pocket in my bedroom, watching a movie on my laptop, and telling myself that it didn't matter, that I was being dramatic. That's actually the phrase I used inside my own head. Don't be dramatic, Kara. I'd heard it so many times that it had become my inner voice. I know now that what happened to me has a name in psychology. Researchers call it family scapegoating, where one child becomes the emotional dumping ground for a family's dysfunction, while another child, the golden child, is elevated and protected. The scapegoat isn't chosen because they're worse. They're chosen because the family needs someone to carry the weight. Roughly 27% of Americans report being estranged from a family member, and studies show that the scapegoat often ends up being the most psychologically aware person in the family. They see the dysfunction first, and they're punished for seeing it. I saw it. I just didn't know what to call it. High school was the years of shrinking. I learned to take up as little space as possible. When Megan got into Georgetown for pre-law, my parents threw a party with 60 guests and a caterer. When I got into Rutgers with a partial academic scholarship for biomedical engineering, my mother said, "That's nice, Kara. Is that the state school?" My father said nothing at all. I remember the silence more than anything. My father's silence was its own form of communication. He didn't argue with my mother. He didn't stand up for me. He didn't pull me aside and say, "I see you." He just existed in the background of my erasure, like a man watching someone drown from a comfortable distance. Graduation was the breaking point, May 2016. I graduated from Rutgers with a 3.87 GPA in biomedical engineering, summa cum laude. I'd been offered a research position at a biotech startup in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My parents said they'd come to the ceremony. I reserved 3 seats, pressed my cap and gown, practiced walking across the stage in my heels in the dorm hallway at midnight. The morning of graduation, my phone buzzed at 7:14 a.m. A text from my mother. "Megan's law review article got published. We're driving up to Georgetown to take her to dinner. So proud. Can we reschedule your thing?" My thing. 4 years of classes, 127 credits, a thesis on biocompatible polymer scaffolding for tissue regeneration. 1 text message, and she called it my thing. I didn't respond. I walked across that stage alone. My name was called, and I looked out into the audience at 3 empty seats in the 7th row. I could see them from the stage, 3 seats with little reserved cards on them that I'd placed there the night before. Something inside me went quiet that day. Not sad, not angry, just empty. Like a room where someone had turned off all the lights and locked the door from the outside. I drove to Cambridge that summer with everything I owned in the back of a Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it. I had $832 in my checking account, a suitcase of clothes, and a box of textbooks. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving. They didn't ask. The first 3 months in Cambridge were the loneliest of my life. I worked 14-hour days at the lab. I ate most of my meals standing up in the break room. My apartment was a studio above a laundromat that smelled like dryer sheets and old wood. At night, the machines would rumble beneath me, and I'd lie in bed listening to them tumble clothes that didn't belong to me and think about how I was the thing my family had tossed into the machine and forgotten to pick up. Thanksgiving that year, I called home. My mother answered on the 4th ring. "Oh, Kara, we're actually about to sit down. Megan brought her new boyfriend. He's lovely. Can I call you back?" She never called back. I checked Instagram that night and saw the photos. Turkey, candles, matching napkins, Megan and her boyfriend raising glasses of wine, my father carving the bird with the same knife he'd used since I was 5. Everyone was there. My Aunt Gloria, my cousin Derek, even the neighbor's dog. But not me. Not even a place setting where I might have been. I ate leftover pad thai from a container in my fridge and watched the rain streak down the window. Below me, the laundromat was closed. Even the machines were quiet. That was my rock bottom. Not the hunger, not the loneliness, but looking at that photo and realizing that the family I'd spent my whole life trying to belong to had never once looked at the empty seat and felt its absence. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known, was that the strangers I'd pass in the hallway the next morning at work would become the family I'd always dreamed of. Her name was Dr. Judith Ng. She was 58 years old, the co-founder of Meridian Biosystems, and the kind of woman who wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and spoke with the quiet precision of someone who had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. She had salt and pepper hair cut short, deep lines around her eyes that only appeared when she smiled, and hands that were always slightly stained with the blue-green tints of the reagents she'd been working with for 3 decades. I met her on a Monday, December 4th. I was in the lab at 6:15 a.m. because I was always in the lab at 6:15 a.m., running a fluorescence assay on a batch of nanoparticle carriers I'd been synthesizing for a drug delivery project. Something wasn't right. The readings were off. I'd recalibrated the spectrophotometer twice, checked the stock solutions, run controls, and still the numbers didn't make sense. I was sitting on a stool with my head in my hands when I heard footsteps. "You look like someone who's been arguing with a machine and losing," a voice said from behind me. I turned around. Dr. Ng was standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. I'd seen her in meetings before. She was the kind of person who sat in the back, listened to everyone else talk, and then said one sentence that made the entire room pivot. But she'd never spoken to me directly. "I'm getting phantom fluorescence," I said. "I've been running this assay for 2 weeks, and I can't find the contamination source." She handed me one of the coffees. "Show me." We spent the next 3 hours going through my data, not just glancing at it, actually going through it, line by line, plate by plate. She didn't tell me the answer. She asked me questions until I found it myself. A batch of wash buffer that had been prepared with water from a line that shared a junction with the autoclave return. Trace minerals, nanomolar concentrations, invisible to everything except the assay I was running. When I found it, she nodded once, slowly, like she'd known the answer the whole time, but wanted me to arrive at it on my own terms. "You have good instincts," she said. "You didn't ignore the anomaly. Most people would have adjusted the baseline and moved on. You stayed with it." 6 words. You have good instincts. I'd been alive for 23 years. No one in my family had ever said anything like that to me. I didn't cry, not then. I cried later, in my car, in the parking garage, with the engine off and the heat fading. I cried because a stranger with 2 cups of coffee had seen something in me that my own mother never looked for. What I didn't know then was that Dr. Ng had her own reasons for showing up early with 2 cups of coffee. She'd lost her only daughter, Lily, to leukemia 11 years earlier. Lily had been 14. Dr. Ng had poured everything after that into the lab, into building something that might spare other families the kind of loss she'd carried every day since. She didn't talk about Lily often, but sometimes when we'd work late and the lab was quiet, she'd mention her, a small thing. "Lily loved this time of night," she'd say. Or, "Lily used to arrange things by color too." She never asked me to fill that space. She simply let me exist in it. Over the next 2 years, Dr. Ng became the mentor I didn't know I needed. She reviewed my protocols. She challenged my assumptions. She pushed me to present at conferences, even when I insisted I wasn't ready. "You're never ready," she'd say. "You just go, and then you are." The first conference was in San Diego, March. I was presenting a poster on lipid nanoparticle encapsulation at the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists meeting. My hands were shaking so badly that I stapled my poster to the board crooked. A researcher from Johns Hopkins stopped by, asked me 3 questions about my lipid formulations, and said, "This is genuinely innovative work. Who's your PI?" When I told him Dr. Ng, he raised his eyebrows. "She doesn't take on just anyone." I called Judith that night from the hotel room. I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, looking out at the Pacific Ocean through a window streaked with salt. "Someone said my work was innovative," I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And what did that feel like?" "Like someone finally turned the lights on in a room I've been sitting in my whole life." "Good," she said. "Now stay in the light." There was a moment, I need to tell you about this, that happened about 7 months after I started working closely with Judith. It was a Friday afternoon and most of the lab had cleared out. I was in her office, which was cluttered with journals and framed photos and a potted fern that she insisted was alive despite all visual evidence to the contrary. We were reviewing a grant application and she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Of course." When I lost Lily, I made a decision. I decided that grief would not be the last chapter, that I would take everything Lily taught me about paying attention, about noticing people, really noticing them, and I would carry that forward. She took off her reading glasses. "When I saw you in that lab at 6 a.m, arguing with a spectrophotometer, I didn't see a struggling researcher. I saw a young woman who had been told she was invisible and had decided to prove the entire world wrong, one experiment at a time. That's not something you teach. That's something someone survives into. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around something heavy and warm and ancient. The grief of never having heard those words from the person I'd needed to hear them from most. "You don't have to be my daughter," she said, "but I'd like to be the person who's in your corner, if you'll let me." I nodded. That was all I could do. Nod and let the tears come, because for the first time in my life, someone was asking permission to love me instead of requiring me to earn it. But it wasn't just the work. It was everything around it. She invited me to dinner at her home for the first time on a Sunday in February. Her husband Tom made roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. Their golden retriever, a ridiculous creature named Biscuit, sat under the table with his head on my foot the entire evening. They asked me questions about my life, real questions, not the performative kind. Where did I grow up? What music did I like? Had I ever been to the Pacific Northwest? I kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when they'd need something from me in return for their kindness, for the favor, the obligation, the invisible invoice. It never came. They were just kind, for no reason other than the fact that kindness was how they moved through the world. Sunday dinners became a rhythm, then holidays, then birthdays. Tom built me a bookshelf for my apartment and wouldn't let me pay for the wood. Dr. Ng, who somewhere along the way became Judith, handed me a key to their house one afternoon and said, "In case you ever need somewhere to go." I held that key in my palm for a long time that night. It weighed almost nothing. It was the heaviest thing I'd ever been given. I want to pause here for a second. If you've ever been the person in your family who felt invisible, the one whose achievements were footnotes while someone else's were headlines, I see you. I know what it's like to wonder if you're the problem, to replay every family dinner, every missed birthday, every unreturned phone call, and ask yourself what you did wrong. Type your answer in the comments if you've ever felt that way. And if this story is hitting close to home, please hit that like button so more people can find it. During these years, the silence from my biological family was almost total. I received a generic happy birthday text from my mother each March, always on March 4th, one day late. My father sent nothing. Megan sent nothing. I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving. I wasn't invited to Christmas. I learned about my grandmother's hip surgery from a Facebook post. I found out my cousin Derek got married from a photo someone tagged me in by accident. They didn't call. They didn't write. And after a while, the absence stopped hurting and started feeling like architecture, like the empty space where a wall used to be that you eventually stop noticing because you've rearranged the furniture. Professionally, things were accelerating in ways I hadn't anticipated. By 25, I'd co-authored 3 papers on targeted drug delivery systems. By 27, I'd filed my first patent, a nanoparticle platform for crossing the blood-brain barrier to deliver chemotherapy agents directly to glioblastoma tumors, the kind of brain cancer that kills most patients within 15 months of diagnosis. My work was being cited by labs at Johns Hopkins, MIT, and the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. At 28, Judith promoted me to Director of Research at Meridian Biosystems. My salary was more money than my parents made combined. And then I met Daniel. Daniel Ashford, 6'1", dark curly hair, a laugh that sounded like it started somewhere deep and arrived at the surface, surprised to be there. He was a civil rights attorney who spent his days representing tenants being illegally evicted from their homes. We met at a bookstore in Cambridge, the kind with creaky floors and a cat asleep on the biography shelf. I was reaching for a book on the top shelf. He was reaching for the same one. Our hands touched on the spine of a biography of Rosalind Franklin. "Good taste," he said. "It's the only copy," I said. "Then I guess one of us has to make a compelling argument," he smiled. It was the kind of smile that makes you forget what you were reaching for in the first place. We talked for 2 hours in the cafe section of that bookstore. He listened like listening was a skill he'd spent his whole life perfecting. When I told him about my work, about nanoparticles and drug delivery and the blood-brain barrier, he didn't glaze over. He asked follow-up questions, real ones. When I mentioned my family, briefly and carefully, he didn't push. He just said, "That sounds like it cost you a lot." 5 words. That sounds like it cost you a lot. No judgment, no advice, no attempt to fix it. Just acknowledgement that what happened to me had a price and that he could see the receipt. We were married 18 months later in a small ceremony in the garden behind Judith and Tom's house. 34 guests, string lights. Biscuit wore a bow tie and stole a dinner roll from the head table. Judith stood where my mother would have stood and read a passage she'd chosen herself from a scientist named Barbara McClintock about having the patience to hear what the material has to say to you. Tom walked me down the aisle because I asked him to, and because when I asked, he put his hand over his heart and couldn't speak for a full 30 seconds. My biological family wasn't there. They didn't know about the wedding. I didn't tell them. Not out of spite, out of peace. I'd stopped performing for love. I'd stopped auditioning for people who'd already cast someone else in the role. I thought about my mother that night, briefly. While Judith was adjusting my veil in the mirror and the late afternoon sun was coming through the window, turning everything gold, I wondered if she'd feel pain knowing I got married without her. And then I realized something that changed the shape of my grief entirely. She wouldn't feel pain, because to feel pain about missing something, you have to have valued it in the first place. And my mother had never valued my milestones. She'd endured them. There's a difference. Researchers who study family estrangement have found that roughly 30% of Americans are currently estranged from a family member, and up to 40% have experienced it at some point. The decision to go no contact isn't made impulsively. It comes after years, sometimes decades, of trying to repair, communicate, and hold the relationship together, usually at enormous personal cost. For me, the estrangement wasn't a door I slammed. It was a door they never opened. I just eventually stopped knocking. The months after the wedding were the quietest, most peaceful of my life. Daniel and I moved into a brownstone apartment in Somerville, just outside Cambridge. He hung shelves. I filled them with books. We adopted a tabby cat named Archimedes, who knocked things off counters with the detached precision of a physics experiment. On Saturday mornings, we'd walk to the farmer's market and come home with bread and peaches and flowers that Daniel would arrange in a jar on the kitchen table, with more care than any man should reasonably give to flowers. I wasn't performing for love. I wasn't shrinking myself. I was just loved. chosen first, chosen fully, chosen without conditions. But here's the thing about silence. It echoes, and eventually it echoes back. It started with a phone call in September, about 8 months before Megan's engagement party. My mother called, not a text, a call. I almost didn't answer. I was in the lab, reviewing phase 2 clinical trial data. I picked up because some old reflex in me, the one she'd installed when I was 9, still responded to her ringtone like a soldier to a bugle. "Kara, it's Mom." "I know." "How are you? It's been a while." She said it the way you'd say it to a neighbor you forgot to wave at, casual, breezy, as if a while wasn't 4.5 years of nothing. "I'm fine, Mom. Is everything okay?" "Yes, everything's wonderful. Listen, Megan's getting engaged. Brandon proposed last night. We're planning a big party and Megan specifically asked if you'd come." Megan specifically asked. Not, "We want you there," not, "We miss you." Megan asked. Even in the invitation, I was an afterthought, attached to Megan's request, not my parents' desire. I said I'd think about it. I hung up. I sat in my office for a long time after that, looking at the patent certificates on the wall, the framed photo of Daniel and me on our wedding day, the small carved wooden bird Judith had given me the first Christmas I'd spent with her family. She'd said, "Every bird has to leave the nest, but the good ones find a new tree." I called Judith that evening. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. The phone call, my mother's tone, the way she'd framed it as Megan's request, not theirs. "What's your gut telling you?" Judith asked. "That it's a trap, that I'll go and they'll spend the whole night reminding me of my place." "And what does the part of you that isn't afraid say?" I thought about it. That I'm not afraid of them anymore, and that scares me more than going. Judith was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I've thought about every day since. "Kara, you've spent 6 years building a life that has nothing to do with them. If you go because you're strong enough to walk into that room and not need anything from it. Don't go to prove something. Go because you have nothing left to prove." I talked to Daniel about it that night. He was quiet for a long time, the way he always was when he was thinking about something that mattered. "What do you want to happen?" he asked. "I don't know." "Then let's go. And whatever happens, I'll be right there." I should tell you something about Daniel. He's the calmest person I've ever met. He argues cases in front of judges and never raises his voice. He wins not by being loud, but by being precise. He arranges facts the way an architect arranges load-bearing walls, so that by the time you see the structure, it's already standing and you realize it was inevitable. Before the big reveal, I have a question for you. If your family had ignored you for years, would you have gone to that party? Type yes or no in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because what happens next changed everything. March 15th, the engagement party, the Ridgewood Country Club, 7 p.m. I hadn't been back to Ridgewood in over 5 years. The town looked the same manicured lawns, the same stone walls lining the driveways, the same illusion of perfection pressed and starched like a Sunday shirt. Daniel held my hand as we pulled into the parking lot. I was wearing a navy silk dress that Judith had helped me pick out. Simple, elegant, not trying to prove anything. The country club ballroom was enormous. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across round tables draped in ivory linen. A string quartet played in the corner. There were ice sculptures, plural, 2 swans, and a heart. Megan had always loved excess when someone else was paying for it. We walked in, and for a moment, no one noticed us. I scanned the room. My mother was near the front, laughing with a group of women I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood. My father was at the bar, swirling a drink. Megan was in the center of the room in a white dress that probably cost more than my first car, holding Brandon's arm and receiving compliments like a queen receiving tribute. Then my mother saw me. Her face did this thing, this micro expression that lasted maybe half a second, where her smile froze and her eyes recalculated, like a computer encountering an unexpected file. Then the smile widened and she crossed the room with her arms open. Kara, oh my God, you came. Look at you. Gerald, Kara's here. My father turned from the bar. He looked older, thinner. His hair had gone almost entirely gray. He nodded at me from across the room, the way you'd nod at someone whose name you couldn't quite remember. And this must be your boyfriend, my mother said, turning to Daniel. Husband, Daniel said. I'm Daniel, Kara's husband. The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. 3 seconds doesn't sound like much, but in a room full of people and string music and clinking glasses, 3 seconds of dead air is a canyon. Husband? My mother repeated. You got married? 2 years ago, I said. And you didn't tell us? I looked at her. I didn't say what I wanted to say, which was, you didn't ask. You didn't call. You forgot my birthday. You missed my graduation. You replaced my report card with a volleyball schedule. You called my degree my thing. Instead, I said, it was a small ceremony. She blinked. Then she smiled again, that performance smile, the one she'd worn since her pageant days, and said, well, we'll have to celebrate later. Tonight is about Megan. Of course it was. The first hour was a masterclass in controlled humiliation. My mother introduced me to people as our other daughter, with the emphasis on other. One of her friends, a woman named Deborah, with a silk scarf and a voice like a foghorn, asked me what I did for a living. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. Kara's in science, she said, waving her hand vaguely, like she was describing a hobby. She works in a lab somewhere in Boston. Cambridge, I said. Same thing, my mother said. Then she turned to Deborah and added, Megan's the one with the law degree. She's at Patterson, Whitfield, and Banks now, youngest associate in their history. Deborah nodded approvingly. I took a sip of water and said nothing. At the table, my Aunt Gloria leaned over and whispered, Your mother tells everyone you're still figuring things out. Are you still figuring things out? I smiled. Something like that. Because Megan's doing so well, your parents are so proud. She patted my hand. Don't worry, sweetie. Some children just bloom late. Some children just bloom late. I had a patent that was being licensed by 3 pharmaceutical companies. I had published in Nature Biotechnology. I was developing a drug delivery system that could potentially extend the lives of brain cancer patients by years. But at that table, in that room, I was still the late bloomer, still the other daughter, still figuring things out. Dinner was served. Speeches began. Brandon's father talked about how wonderful Megan was. My father stood up and gave a toast that mentioned Megan's name 14 times in 4 minutes. He mentioned mine 0. My mother didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. Her face said everything, radiating pride every time she looked at Megan, and dimming slightly, almost imperceptibly, every time her gaze accidentally swept past me. And then it was the open mic portion of the evening. Brandon's friends, Megan's sorority sisters, a cousin I barely recognized. One by one, they stood up and said beautiful things about the happy couple. The room was warm with champagne and affection and the particular glow that comes from celebrating people who are used to being celebrated. Then Daniel stood up. I didn't know he was going to do this. He hadn't told me. He just placed his napkin on the table, squeezed my hand once, and walked to the microphone with the same quiet confidence he carries into a courtroom. Good evening, he said. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniel Ashford. I'm Kara's husband. A murmur went through the room. I could feel eyes shifting toward me. My mother's smile tightened. I want to congratulate Megan and Brandon, truly. Engagement is a beautiful thing, and I wish you both a lifetime of happiness. He paused. Let the warmth land. Then he shifted. But since this is a night about family, I want to take a moment to talk about my wife. Because I've noticed that in this room, some of you might not know much about her. And I think it's time you did. My mother's hand moved to her pearls. She touched them the way you'd touch a seatbelt during turbulence. Kara graduated summa cum laude from Rutgers University with a degree in biomedical engineering. She did this on a partial scholarship without financial support from her family while working 2 part-time jobs. The room was quiet now, not murmuring quiet, holding its breath quiet. After graduation, she was recruited to Meridian Biosystems, one of the leading biotech research firms in the country. Within 5 years, she became their director of research. She currently leads a team of 23 scientists. He paused again. Let the numbers settle. Kara holds 2 patents for a nanoparticle-based drug delivery platform designed to treat glioblastoma, one of the deadliest forms of brain cancer. Her work has been published in Nature Biotechnology, The Lancet, and the Journal of Controlled Release. Her research has been cited over 400 times by labs at Johns Hopkins, MIT, Stanford, and the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. I looked at my mother. Her face had gone pale. Not angry pale. Something worse. Confused pale. Like she was watching a movie about a stranger and slowly realizing the stranger was her daughter. 3 months ago, Daniel continued, Kara was awarded the NIH Director's New Innovator Award. It's one of the most prestigious grants in biomedical science, given to researchers whose work has the potential to transform medicine. The grant is worth $2.3 million. A gasp. Actual, audible, across the room gasps. Aunt Gloria's hand went to her mouth. Deborah with the scarf set down her champagne glass like it had bitten her. She didn't ask me to say any of this. She'd probably be angry that I am. He looked at me and smiled. But I married a woman who has spent her entire life being told she wasn't enough by the people who were supposed to love her the most. And I will not sit at a table and listen to one more person call her the other daughter without saying something. The string quartet had stopped playing. I don't know when. The room was so silent, I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. Kara is not the failure of this family. She never was. She's the one who left, and she built something extraordinary. Not for attention, not for approval, because that's who she is. He looked directly at my mother. You should know her. She's remarkable. He walked back to the table. He sat down. He picked up his napkin and placed it on his lap like he hadn't just detonated a truth bomb in the middle of a country club ballroom. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted. 11 seconds where 200 people stared at their plates or their drinks or their hands, and no one knew what to say because the architecture of a lie had just been exposed, load-bearing walls and all, and the whole structure was swaying. My mother was the first to move. She stood up, walked toward the bathroom, and my father followed her. He didn't look at me as he passed. He didn't say a word, but I saw his chin trembling. I saw his eyes, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw something in them that might have been shame. Megan stared at me across the table. Her expression was hard to read. Shock, yes, but something else beneath it. Something that looked almost like recognition, like she was seeing me for the first time and realizing that the picture she'd been given of her little sister had been painted by someone else. The rest of the night unfolded in fragments. People came to our table, not to offer congratulations exactly, more like apologies disguised as small talk. Kara, I had no idea. Kara, that's amazing. Kara, your husband is something else. Each one carried the subtext of people who'd believed a story without ever checking the source. My Aunt Gloria sat down beside me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, honey, she said. I repeated what your mother told me. I should have asked you myself. You didn't know, I said. That's the problem. I didn't want to know. It was easier to just go along. That was the most honest thing anyone in my family had ever said to me. Around 9:30, my father found me on the terrace. Daniel was inside getting our coats. The air smelled like cut grass and the particular coolness that New Jersey gets in early spring, when the day's warmth gives way and the night feels like it's apologizing for something. He stood beside me without speaking for a long time. Then he said, I was a coward, Kara. I didn't respond. I watched your mother erase you, year after year, and I said nothing because it was easier to say nothing, because saying something meant admitting that something was wrong, and admitting something was wrong meant the whole thing falls apart. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I looked at him, my father, the man who'd handed me a $20 bill on my 14th birthday and called it a celebration. The man who'd toasted Megan 14 times and me 0. The man whose silence had been its own kind of cruelty. Quieter than my mother's, but just as cutting, because silence from someone who could have spoken is its own betrayal. I hear you, Dad, I said. But hearing you and trusting you are two different things, and I'm not there yet. He nodded. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He didn't argue. He didn't say, don't be dramatic. He just stood there, an old man in a suit that didn't fit quite right anymore, carrying the weight of every word he'd never said. My mother didn't come find me. She stayed inside, surrounded by women who were now looking at her differently. The narrative she'd built, Kara is the failure, Megan is the success, we did everything we could, had been dismantled in 3 minutes and 40 seconds by a man with a microphone and the truth. Daniel and I left at 10 p.m. We drove home in near silence. Not the heavy silence of unresolved things, but the quiet, settled silence of something that had finally been said. About halfway home, Daniel looked at me and said, Are you okay? I think so, I said. I think I've been waiting for that without knowing I was waiting. You didn't need them to know, Kara, but they needed to. He was right. I hadn't needed their approval. I hadn't needed their pride. But the lie, the version of me they'd been telling everyone for years, that needed to be corrected. Not for my ego, for the truth. Because when you let someone else write your story, they'll always make themselves the hero, and you the footnote. The aftermath was swift and thorough. Within 48 hours, my mother's phone was ringing off the hook. The extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, all wanted to know the same thing. Why didn't you tell us about Kara? Why did you say she was struggling? My Aunt Gloria, to her credit, called my mother directly and said, "Diane, you owe that girl more than an apology. You owe her an explanation." My mother's response, relayed to me later by Gloria, was, "We were trying to protect her. She was always so sensitive." There it was again, the script. The same lines they'd been reading for 31 years. She was always so sensitive. Don't be dramatic. Some children just aren't academic. It was a language designed to make the listener question the scapegoat rather than the storyteller. And my mother spoke it fluently. Protect me. From what? From success? From recognition? From the basic dignity of being known? That wasn't protection. That was erasure, dressed up in motherly concern. Word travels fast in a town like Ridgewood. Within a week, my mother's book club knew. Her tennis partner knew. The woman at the dry cleaners who'd been hearing about poor Kara for years knew. Deborah with the scarf, it turned out, had a daughter-in-law who worked in biotech and immediately Googled my name. She found my publications, my patents, the press release about the NIH award. She forwarded it to 7 people, including my mother. I know this because Gloria told me, and Gloria, God bless her, had become the most reliable news source in the Ellison family orbit. My cousin Derek called me for the first time in 4 years. "Kara, what the hell?" he said. "Your mom told everyone you were working at a pharmacy, like behind the counter." "I know." "You're literally saving lives, and she told people you were counting pills?" "That sounds about right." He was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "I'm sorry I didn't check." "You didn't know to check. That's the whole point." That's the thing about family scapegoating that people on the outside don't understand. It's not just one person being cruel. It's an entire system that operates on false information. The scapegoat is presented to the world through a distorted lens, and everyone around them adjusts their perception accordingly. They don't question the lens because it's held by the parents, the people they trust most to tell the truth. And the scapegoat learns to accept it because when you've been told you're less than since childhood, the lie starts to feel like fact. My mother called me 5 days after the party. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 47 seconds long. She said, "Kara, your father and I think we should talk. What Daniel did was very inappropriate and it ruined Megan's evening. But we're willing to move past it if you are. Call me back." I played it twice, not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted to make sure I'd heard it correctly. She wasn't apologizing. She was reframing. Daniel was inappropriate. The evening was ruined. They were willing to move past it. The entire message was a masterpiece of deflection, acknowledging nothing, admitting nothing, repositioning herself as the reasonable party, extending grace. I didn't call back. Daniel heard the voicemail and shook his head slowly. "That's not an apology," he said. "That's a closing argument for the defense." Megan texted me 3 days after the party. It was a long message, longer than anything she'd ever written to me. She said she hadn't realized how bad it was. She said she thought I'd chosen to pull away. She said our parents had told her I wasn't interested in family events, that I'd become distant and difficult. She'd believe them because it was easier than questioning the people who'd made her feel golden her entire life. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she wrote. "I'm asking if there's a door I can knock on." I read it 3 times. I showed it to Daniel. He said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to believe her," I said. "But I've been burned by wanting to believe people in that family before." I wrote back, "The door exists, Megan, but I'm the one who decides when it opens." That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't opened it yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. But the fact that it's my decision, that I hold the key, not them, that's the part that matters. 2 days ago, something small happened that I want to tell you about. Daniel and I were at the grocery store and we ran into a woman from his office with her teenage daughter. The daughter was quiet, standing slightly behind her mother, holding a tote bag with both hands like she was trying to disappear into it. When the adult started talking, I caught the girl glancing at me and then looking away fast. The way you do when you've been trained to believe your gaze is an imposition. I don't know her story. I don't know if she's the scapegoat or the golden child or neither. But something about the way she held that bag, tight, protective, like she was carrying something she was afraid someone would take, reminded me of myself at 14, holding a bowl of potato salad and smiling like my face was stitched into place. I leaned over and said, "I like your bag." She looked up. "Really?" "Yeah, it's great." She smiled, just a small one, but real. That's how it starts, you know. Not with grand speeches or dramatic reveals. It starts with someone seeing you, actually seeing you, and saying something kind for no reason other than the fact that you deserve kindness. Last Sunday, I sat at Judith and Tom's dining table. Biscuit was under the table, older now, his muzzle gray, his tail still thumping. Tom had made his roast chicken. Judith was telling a story about a lab accident from 1997 that involved a centrifuge and a very unfortunate cup of coffee. Daniel was laughing so hard he had to set down his fork, and I sat there in that warm kitchen with people who had chosen me, not because of obligation, not because of blood, but because of who I am. And I felt full. Not the performance of fullness you do for an audience, real fullness, the kind that settles into your bones and stays. I didn't replace my family. They abandoned me first. And what I built in the space they left wasn't revenge. It wasn't a scheme. It was a life, a real one, with people who see me, who celebrate me, who love me without conditions and without keeping score. If you're watching this and you've been the scapegoat in your family, the one whose achievements were minimized, whose feelings were dismissed, whose name was always said with a sigh instead of a smile, I want you to hear this. You are not the failure they told you you were. You never were. The system was broken, not you. And leaving that system, setting boundaries, building something new, that's not dramatic. That's not ungrateful. That's not revenge. That's architecture. You're building the life you were always supposed to have with the people who were always supposed to find you. Family isn't blood. Family is the people who show up with 2 cups of coffee at 6 a.m. and stay until you find the answer. Family is the man who hands you a key and can't speak for 30 seconds because the gesture means that much. Family is chosen fully without conditions. I found my people, and I hope you find yours. You deserve it. If this story touched you in any way, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family? Have you built a chosen family that changed your life? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, please share it with them. Sometimes the thing that saves us is knowing we're not alone. My name is Kara Ellison. I'm 31 years old, and I am no one's footnote.